Baku always delivers.
Well done, Baku.
That was such an intense race. I'd actually gone to attend my first F1 screening, and the roller coaster of emotions, especially during the last couple of laps, was just epic to watch. A lot of things have changed now. McLaren is leading the Constructors' Championship after I don't know how many years. You've got Ferrari very close to Red Bull. And let's talk about this guy, Oscar Piastri. What a performance, what a drive. This Oscar win felt a lot more special than the Hungary win. So we're going to start the race review by talking about the winning team, which is McLaren, and they've had such an opposite day on Saturday. Norris out in P17, Piastri in P2. So let me discuss what happened with Norris. So he didn't do a great lap at the start of Q1. Actually, nobody did because the track was evolving so quickly. Everybody had to go back at the end. So McLaren sent out Norris quite late, and when he was on his lap, he was setting good times. He would have gotten into Q2, but the problem was that in sector 3, because Ocon had a puncture or he was going really slow, because of that, they had to put a yellow flag briefly, and Norris's luck was so bad that he was right there. So he had to lift off, and that's why he couldn't set a lap time. He just went into the pits, and that yellow flag was for such a short time that it didn't affect other drivers. It ended up affecting Norris. So purely bad luck. It's not like something bad that he did or a mistake he did. It's just something that he couldn't control. Makes me wonder, shouldn't he have just finished the lap regardless and then later on see if he gets a penalty or not? Worst case, 3-place grid penalty. It's better to get a 3-place grid penalty from P3 than to start from P17. But maybe he did that because of the safety, but he ended up in P17. Oscar, on the other hand, P2, very good quali. And in the race as well, because two people ahead of him were starting back, he started at P15 and he had a good race. His first stint on hard tires was really good. He managed to keep the tires in the right place. Him and Albon were like just going on and on those hard tires. And he actually played a very important role in Piastri's win as well, because Red Bull pitted Perez first. They tried to undercut Piastri with Perez, and Norris ended up holding Perez for a long time, because of which Piastri could pit and he could prevent the undercut from Perez. So it was a good recovery drive from him. You can't really fault him for that. He did his job. He helped the team as well, and eventually, because of the crash, he ended up in P4 with the fastest lap. So he gained a slight lead in the championship in comparison to Max. And then if we talk about Piastri, he was definitely the driver of the day. He won driver of the day, and what a drive. He's driving an F1 car for the second time in the Baku street circuit, and still that drive was so flawless. Initially, when they were on the set of medium tires, he was not able to catch Leclerc, but when they were on the hard tires, that McLaren was just too good. And that move on Leclerc where he just dive bombed and he took that risk, it was so good. His team had actually told him to be a little more cautious about this and play his cards very carefully, but he just went for it. And it's just that pure racer in him that you could see, and it was really tough to believe that it's this guy's second season, and now you know why all the Piastri hype is there. McLaren is also in the news for some wrong reasons, because apparently they're exploiting a loophole is what everyone's saying online. So you can see the rear wing is actually flexing a lot and creating these small flaps which could potentially help in increasing the top speed of the car. McLaren's top speed was crazy. Piastri without DRS, Leclerc with DRS, he still couldn't close him on him and make an overtake. So what is happening is that this wing is flexing and creating these small gaps. You see, when DRS is activated, the full flap is open and you get a top speed boost. These small flaps could also do something similar on a smaller scale and slightly impact the top speed, and maybe that's giving them an advantage. That is what the observation is right now. Now this wing was tested by FIA. They do test it under certain load conditions and it was passed by them, but the problem is that the testing is not that dynamic. They haven't done the testing on the track under different load, under different corners. So maybe there is a small loophole, maybe it's nothing. We don't know how much it's contributing to their pace, but I'm sure other teams are already on it, and we are going to hear about this in the next couple of races. So yeah, keep a note of that. But actually pace wise, McLaren and Ferrari were really close. You could see in the first stint, Leclerc was properly keeping Piastri at bay. He used to come in DRS again and again, and he just couldn't make an overtake because here once again dirty air was the problem. Dirty air, basically if you're within 1.5 seconds of someone, it just makes it a lot more difficult to overtake and it kills your tires, and that is what happened with Leclerc. He was behind Piastri all this while trying to make an overtake. That ended up killing his tires, and you could see that at the end of the race he was vulnerable not only to Perez but to Sainz as well. How did Piastri manage to overtake Leclerc? I think Ferrari made two small mistakes which Leclerc was talking about. First of all, when Perez pitted, they should have immediately pitted Leclerc as well to avoid being undercut by Piastri, because Perez pitted, then Piastri pitted, then Leclerc pitted. Even though he ended up being ahead of Piastri, that gap that he had built, went down quite a lot. And then the second reason was that Leclerc was told to bring in the tire slowly, not to push a lot, not to defend a lot aggressively in those first initial 4-5 laps of the hard tire, so that the tires will last longer, as they were planning to do a one-stopper. And that's when Piastri attacked, and Leclerc didn't defend that aggressively because he was like, eventually his tires might go off and he will be able to overtake him. The race is long, as you can see, they went on really long on those hard tires. So he was like, eventually it's gonna come back to me, but it never did, because clean air is king. Piastri had clean air, Leclerc was in dirty air. But still, it was not a bad weekend for Ferrari. They were almost P2 and P4, eventually being P3 until that Sainz and Perez incident happened. Sainz had a decent race, but then let's talk about this incident now, because that's what you want me to talk about. And the FIA deemed it as a racing incident, and I more or less agree with it. I mean, the reaction when I was at the screening was crazy. We just saw Leclerc, Sainz and Perez fighting, everybody was cheering, and then they're racing, and then suddenly the crash happens and everyone's like, oh my god, what just happened? So let's look at it from here. Sainz is clearly ahead of Perez, and as you can see, he's slowly veering towards the left to catch that slipstream of Leclerc. Now he is the car ahead, so he's entitled to do this. It's not like he's side by side with Perez. Perez is quite far behind, and Perez can see that Sainz is coming close. But somehow Perez decides to stick to his line, because even he wanted the slipstream from Leclerc. So both of them ended up being greedy. They had a contact and their race was ruined. Perez had a lot of room to the left, so he could have gone there to avoid this crash, but then he wouldn't have gotten the advantage of the slipstream and he would have easily conceded the position. So both of them were greedy. Both of them ended up in a crash. Giving either one of the drivers a penalty would have been really harsh. So yeah, that's okay. You could find faults on either side of them. But the thing is, if I feel Perez could have gone a little bit to the left, he would have saved his race as well. Instead of going home with 0 points, he could have gone with more points. But I mean, they're driving at 300 kilometers an hour. Hindsight is 2020. Let's talk about Red Bull though, because Perez was really strong throughout the whole weekend. So for his weekend to end up like this was quite sad. He was clearly better in qualifying and in racing compared to Max. And Baku is one of his strongest tracks. So it was really nice to see him get his groove back. Red Bull actually did a mix and match of 3 different floor upgrades. They picked out the good performing pieces from all of the upgrades and put them into one package, and that seemed to work for Perez. For Max, actually, they did some setup changes after FP3, and since then his car was just not in the right window. It was jumping constantly. Max even said that it was like driving on 3 wheels, because on those bumps the car was just too unstable and he just couldn't make anything out of this. Not a great weekend for him. He got overtaken by Norris as well, and he lost the championship lead by 3 points. He still has a good enough cushion, but Singapore is not going to be any easy. Probably it's going to be worse than Baku, so I'm not sure where the championship is going to go. Their upgrade is coming for the US Grand Prix, so at Texas, so they have to just do damage limitation in Singapore, and I feel this is where Ferrari could potentially get a jump on Red Bull in the Constructors' Championship. They still have a lot of stuff to figure out with their car, and let's see if they can do it or not. They are in that Mercedes sort of a place where the car has a very small setup window, and if you miss that, it's a complete disaster to drive. And Mercedes also kind of has been a disaster since the summer break. Russell had a decent qualifying, but Hamilton was quite far behind. Actually, the gap was more than what it is usually, and the problem was the tires. Once again, they were not there at the right temperature in qualifying. I don't know what's going on with Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton, because that is the major problem. When the tires are in the right window, he's able to put out good laps, but when they are not, they are just not there. And the same problem actually is with Russell in the race, because in the post-race interview, Russell was talking about how when he started off on the medium tires, he was doing much worse than everyone around him, but when after the pit stop, when he switched to the hard tires, he was lapping a lot faster than Oscar, Leclerc. So this unpredictability is very weird. Pirelli probably needs to look into this, that why are these tires so unpredictable? And I think Mercedes is affected by this a little more. Every team is affected. I guess Mercedes is being affected a little more. And for Lewis Hamilton also, after the practice sessions, they did put a component on the car that didn't work out, and then he also had to take an engine penalty. So they were expecting a bad race for him, so they were like, let's just take the engine penalty here, start from the pit lane, whatever you can do, whatever you can get in this race, damage limitation, so you don't have to take this penalty later on. So there was nothing exciting about their race. The only exciting thing was he was racing with Colapinto and Bearman a little bit, and probably the rookies got some experience experience from a 7-time world champion. I was honestly really impressed by Franco Colapinto. He did bin it into the wall in the practice sessions and everyone was a little bit iffy because it was his first time in Baku in an F1 car, and it's very tough to do a full race around it. He managed to do it well and he ended up in the points along with Alex Albon, so double points for Williams. Albon did a very good job with his tires. The strategy worked out really well and I've been really impressed with Franco's performance. He got into Q3, he drove a good race as well, and now actually Kick Sauber is considering him because they are yet to finalize their one more driver. So let's see if we get to see him on the grid next year. The other rookie that we're definitely going to see on the grid is Ollie Bearman, and he was driving for Haas and he also ended up in the points. Quite cool for him, right? He debuted in the Ferrari, got into points. He debuted in Haas and he got into points. Yeah, provided the top two guys above crashed out and that put him in the points, but still, it's great for him. So all in all, a pretty banger race like always in Baku, and now McLaren is leading the Constructors' Championship and Ferrari I can see is only 31 points behind Red Bull, and considering the next race is Singapore, Ferrari historically has been really good at that circuit. McLaren should be fine as well. Red Bull is gonna struggle, so I won't be surprised if Ferrari ends up jumping Red Bull in the Constructors' Championship. As for Drivers' Championship, Max is still safe. The gap is around 59 points from Max to Norris, but then considering Max has not been finishing in the top 3 lately, if Norris ends up winning a race or two, especially in Singapore, I think he has to win if he wants to win the championship. So if he ends up winning the race and Max is like quite behind, like he was recently P5, P6, then the championship will get very interesting when we get the North and South American races and then finally in Abu Dhabi. What are your thoughts about the Azerbaijan Grand Prix? Let me know in the comments, and let me know the predictions for Singapore Grand Prix as well. Who do you think is going to win the race? What's your top 3? What's your boldest prediction? Let me know in the comments. Let me see if you guys get it right. As of now, you can subscribe to the channel. We need to reach 10,000 subscribers before the season ends, and you have to follow me on Instagram at your F1 guy for all the latest updates. Thank you, and I'll catch up with you guys after the Singapore Grand Prix. Then there is a one big break. You probably won't see any race reviews for a month. So yeah, stay tuned for that one.